Well, we still have at least a couple weeks of diplomacy, I think. I have a hard time imagining that Putin would consider major military incursion before the Olympics, his trip to Beijing to be with Xi Jinping. I mean, China is his one major friend on the global stage, and he's not going to undermine and embarrass him. And diplomacy is still going on. We had reasonably productive conversations between Macron and Putin, and more broadly, the Normandy format, as it's called, over the last 48 hours, 8 hours long with the Russians. So I think we'll have some more engagement between the U.S. and Russia. And the letter that was sent, there'll be some Russian response after Putin digests it to a greater degree. But to be clear, the Biden administration is increasingly worried that the Russians are set on an escalatory direction, that they are planning military strikes. And if that happens, the impact on the markets is going to be pretty severe. There's no question.
When you say the markets, I mean, we've already seen natural gas prices go crazy, very sensitive to this idea of Putin using Russia's gas supplies as a weapon here. Where else do you see spillover effects?
Well, I'll give you an example. I mean, since Biden met with Putin back in June in Geneva, Biden gave a red line to the Russian president. He said, don't you attack critical infrastructure with cyber. This was right after the Colonial Pipeline hit, or we're going to respond in kind. And the Russians responded, and they've stopped. They actually stopped those criminal gangs from engaging in that activity. Now, if suddenly there's war in Ukraine and the Americans are putting heavy sanctions on Russia, they're not stopping that anymore. Those cyber attacks are going to return. So that's an additional risk that comes out. I mean, if you have a major attack on Ukraine, Odessa's, I think, one of the most important grain exporting ports in the world. It's certainly, you're going to have problems with that for at least the near term, right? How do we deal with that? And how do you have access? And I mean, the fact that we're talking about potential confrontation with a major power is this is not like Afghanistan, where it was a disaster and embarrassment for the Biden administration, but it really mattered to, tens of millions of Afghans, disaster for them. But for the rest of the world, 6 months later, we're not paying attention. This goes really badly. We're talking about this for years. The knock-on effects of this is going to be very significant.
Ian, I mean, two things come to mind. One is, why would Putin have done all that he's done already if he wasn't intent on going further? It would seem a huge amount of effort for nothing. And secondly, does he have quite a lot of leeway because of the dissension in the ranks across Europe, Germany and France not taking as tough a position for obvious reasons as the UK and the US? So, yes, economic sanctions can hurt them, but if it's not a united and very strong approach from all of the allies, is he going to weigh up that this is worth his while?
Well, the interesting thing is, so far, I think that the response from NATO has been quite unified, much more than Putin probably would have been briefed on before he took the decision to escalate to begin with. Remember, Merkel's gone. She was supposed to be the tough nut on sanctions and leading the Minsk Accords. Macron is talking about strategic autonomy, and he was really annoyed about the whole AUKUS fracas from the United States. And Biden's focused on China. He got out of Afghanistan. He seemed to be as weaker, right? And yet, what we see right now is the United States leading NATO with redeployments to the Baltics and Bulgaria and Romania. We see the Americans and the Europeans say that if you invade, there's going to be economic hell to pay. And furthermore, we have the Germans accepting, behind the scenes at least, and I think they will say publicly in short order if they haven't already, that if there's any incursion, that Nord Stream's done. And that's why Olaf Scholz has just accepted this trip to come and meet with Biden in February 7th in Washington. I mean, Scholz was a little squishy to begin with, but he's moved in a very different direction. So I think if you're Putin right now, you look at NATO and say, this is much more coherent than I expected. And if you escalate further, it's probably going to be more cautious escalation. It's not a sudden invasion, to see if you can start to squeeze some of that allied cohesion and away from each other. That I think is a problem for them so far.